Me age 7, mom left dad for an aging bassist in a shit-tier hair band, she ends up owning on heroin a few years later. Whatever, fuck her. Only child, dad raises me the best he can. Have no other family except an uncle that my dad refuses to talk to, and one grandpa in a nursing home. B14, grandpa dies, dad and uncle both inherit about 2 mil each. Grandpa had a textile company that he sold, if you are wondering how he got rich. Saw uncle around that time because him and dad had to get all the shit in order with the grandpa situation. He's glad to see me, we talk and catch up a bit. Dad still hates his guts, but he never says why, he just mumbles under his breath as he changes the subject or pretends he needs to go do something around the house. I don't really ask about it anymore, but I did hear that my uncle did good with his money and started buying up land. Fast forward to HS, we find out dad has cancer in his throat, try to be optimist but it doesn't look good. Use up a lot of the money on treatment, I postpone going to college to stay with him so he isn't alone. Ends up dying when I'm 21, I have a little under 10 grand and the house after all is said and done. Work shitty jobs here and there, get girlfriend, she cheats on me after 2 years. She lives with me so I can't kick her out right away, say fuck it, take an extended amount of time off from job and drive off to get away from the situation. Have no one in my life that is close to me now, feel hopeless and depressed. Drive aimlessly around the country, hit some famous places along the way, Grand Canyon etc. See a bunch of tourists with their happy families, get super lonely. Decide to try and find my uncle. Takes a lot of searching but eventually I get a number of a guy that keeps an answering machine for my uncle. Apparently uncle lives off-grid in a cabin by himself and doesn't keep a phone or anything there. Anyway, don't want to hang around and wait for a call back, drive to where he lives. Get to the guy's place who keeps uncle's answering machine, old retired guy, pretty friendly. He tells me there isn't a road to my uncle's cabin, there is only a trail through the woods. It's like 10 miles, so the guy lends me an old mountain bike and tells me I can leave my car at his place. I get my bag with all my essentials and thank him before I head out. Start wondering how uncle will react to me dropping in on him after so long, kinda nervous. Pass a few ponds and small lakes, I can't believe uncle owns all this land. Get to cabin, uncle is outside and staring at me like a psycho, he seems kinda paranoid. I yell to him and tell him it's me, he lightens up quite a bit, seems happy to see me. Get the "you've grown so much, didn't recognize you." Get inside and we start catching up, he makes some food. I tell him my situation, he says I can stay with him for a while, feels good. Next day we just hang out, I see he has a ton of journals that he has been writing in every day since he was 10. My dad had some too, but he quit after a couple years. Uncle said I can read them if I don't mind seeing some mildly questionable shit, I guess he was pretty honest when he wrote. Spend a lot of time reading those journals, learning more about my dad's family. Eventually I want to get some stuff that my uncle didn't have at his cabin, mainly beer. In the morning go back to the car and head to nearest place for some supplies, shitty gas station. Get back and ready to hit the trail again, old man comes out and I talk to him a bit more. He asks about family history, tell him dad and uncle didn't get along. He tells me that it might have to do with the lake disappearance. What disappearance? Apparently a long time ago this area was a popular camping and canoeing spot. People would pay like a regular campground and carry their canoes in there. Uncle used to live in a different spot, and he would come here every year when he was younger. Old guy tells me that one year a dude disappeared there, his tent was all torn up and there was blood everywhere. Only other person on record that was there at the time was my uncle. There was an investigation and everything, my uncle got cleared eventually, and the dude was never found. I asked the dude what he thinks happened, and he says he has no idea, and that I should ask uncle what happened. This was really unnerving at the time. I figured this is why my dad broke off contact with my uncle. Head back to uncle's with the beer and other goodies. Not gonna lie, that information changed my image of my uncle. Decide not to bring it up right away, but I really want to know what his story is. We drink beer and just hang out outside. I ask him if I can take out the canoe the next day. He says sure, but I can only go in specific spots. Don't bother asking why. He starts to make something for us to eat. I sit and read more journals. Decide to try and find the journal for the year that the disappearance happened. Start going through it when I get to a spot that had like 5 pages ripped out, and the way it looked seemed like my uncle had done it recently. All the other journals that I looked through had all their pages, so I was pretty sure he did this at some point after I took an interest in the journals. I decide not to bring it up. We eat and hang out some more and go to sleep. The next day I want to head out in the canoe and paddle around a bit. He gives me some pointers and tells me to stay only on this one lake. Okay, sure. I paddle around for a while, hugging the shore mostly, kinda scared to go into deeper water. Eventually lose sight of cabin. It's a nice day, lots of wildlife. I see an odd looking area offshore. There are a bunch of chopped down trees and it's really overgrown, but it looked like something used to be there. I decide to check it out and find out that it's an old overgrown trail. Also, it looks like someone tried to cover it up with logs and debris to hide it. Too curious to leave it alone, get out and walk through the thick vegetation. Follow what is left of the trail for about a quarter mile. Come out to a different lake. It is dead quiet, no wind, no animal sounds, no bugs. Get a super weird feeling like someone is watching me. Start walking out on the rocky shore. Realize it's way too quiet here, even the water seemed to be too still. Decide to go back to the canoe and head back to the cabin. Uncle is out and waves to me, asks me how it was. Tell him it was fun. Ask him about the other lake. His face goes blank as he looks off in that direction. Says he told me not to go to any other lakes. I tell him I just walked there, I didn't take the canoe over. He tells me to never go there again, or I would have to leave. He tells me he doesn't want me going in the canoe again. He seems pissed. Okay, whatever. He disappears for a while. I decide to get more beer. Get back to cabin and uncle still isn't there. I decide to hold off on the beer and make something to eat. Uncle gets back and he is pretty quiet, things are kinda tense. I just end up sitting around till bedtime. Next day uncle is in a better mood, apologizes for being a dick. We start drinking beer, he goes through most of them and loosens up a lot. I guess he really needed to take the edge off. I ask him why dad and him never got along. He just kinda brushes it off. I ask him if it is to do with the incident on the lake. He gets quiet for a moment and asks me what I know about it. I tell him what the old guy told me. He gets quiet for a really long time and just stares off in the direction of the lake with the overgrown trail. Maybe it was because he was drunk, or maybe it was because he was tired of keeping it to himself, but he told me where he hid the missing journal pages. He told me to make of it what I wanted, but that what he wrote was the truth. He got up and went for a walk. I went to the spot in the cabin where he hid the pages and started reading them. First page is from the day before his trip out. It didn't really have anything too interesting on it. Mostly a list of all that he took on his camping trip, and what he ate and the weather, which he documented every day. The next 2 pages were from the same day, they were about him arriving at the park hoping he was the first person there that season so that he could camp wherever he wanted. He found out that there was already another guy out on the lakes who went in the night before. I guess back when the land was a campground it was a lot easier to access a lot of areas, so it didn't take long to get to the lakes with his canoe. He had a specific lake that he liked to stay at and he was hoping to have it all to himself, or at least his favorite spot, which was a small island in the lake. When he got onto that lake he saw smoke on the island, and a red tent, so he was disappointed that his spot was taken. Eventually he settled onto a small peninsula that had some trees on it. The only other noteworthy thing from that day was that he never saw the guy walking around on the island, and eventually the smoke stopped. The last thing on that page was that Uncle planned on moving to a different lake the next day because he wanted to be completely alone. The next day he noticed that the guy hadn't lit a fire, and he still hadn't seen him walking around on the island and his canoe was still there. There was a storm rolling in that day and my uncle decided to stay at that spot for another night. He also wrote that during the night on his first day, he got up to take a piss. The moon wasn't quite full, but it gave off a lot of light. He saw what looked like a log standing straight up out in the middle of the lake. The last page had 2 days on it, one on the front, on the back. The weather was horrible the next day, windy and cloudy. He decided to try and head out anyway, but ended up flipping his canoe and had to get back to shore. He made a fire and dried out all his gear and clothes the best he could. He set up his tent again and was in for another night. He also wrote that he still had not seen any movement or a fire on the island, and that the night before he once again saw the upright log on the lake. But this time it had been closer, about half of the way between the first place he saw it and his campsite. He also noted that it was not visible during the day. From what I had read up to that point I didn't understand what was so bad about this that he would try and hide it from me. That all changed when I read the last entry. The last night that he was there the moonlight woke him up, he also had to take a piss. He got out of the tent in the cool night air to complete silence, the only sound was the faintest lapping of the water on the shore. As he was relieving himself he noticed how calm and glassy the lake was, and then he saw it. The thing that he thought was a log stood at the very end of the peninsula. Now that it was on land he could tell that it was alive, a pitch black figure almost 7 feet tall, wearing what looked like wet robes. He crawled back into his tent, his heart racing, and pretended like it wasn't there. Then he heard the voice of a child in distress.
"Can you help me? I'm lost."
Followed by a low giggling and random whispers around the tent.
"Shush! Don't wake him."
Then more giggling. This went on for what seemed like an eternity, the sounds of footsteps all around the tent, giggling and shushing. Just before dawn he heard what he presumed to be the figure wading back out into the water. As soon as it was light out he was already packing his things and heading back the way he came in, but first he paddled up to the island, to see if there was anyone there. All he saw were the remains of the first fire, the tent torn apart on one side, blood everywhere, and strange symbols drawn on a big boulder. He reported the missing man, but he never told anyone about what he saw that night. After I was done reading I just sat there until my uncle got back from his walk.
"It's still out there,"
he said as he looked towards the lake. He said that he bought up the area over the years, and tries his best to keep people off of that lake. He says it's cursed. That didn't stop me from going back once more to see it, but that's a story for a different time.